Cane toads are on the march, sweeping across northern Australia into the wilds of the Kimberley. It's been disastrous for local wildlife, but local rangers are taking on the toads with the help of science.
In the heart of the Australian Outback, a desperate war is being waged. For decades, the toxic cane toad has reigned supreme, a deadly species with no natural predators. But scientists have just unleashed a secret weapon: an army of native killer ants. What followed was a biological massacre that left experts stunned, rewriting everything we knew about nature's hierarchy. To understand how these killer ants were released in the first place, we must first uncover the secret history of an unstoppable invader. Australia's greatest mistake. In 1935, a group of scientists stood on a dock in Queensland, Australia, welcoming 102 visitors that would eventually change the fate of the continent forever. These visitors were not actual people, but exotic cane toads brought in from Hawaii, and they were now in a foreign land for a not-so-simple reason. Back in the Australian fields, farmers had been suffering from a greyback beetle infestation that had devoured sugarcane crops planted by European migrants, and these toads were supposed to be the solution to their problem. However, there was a massive oversight with this plan. The beetles infiltrated at the top of the cane stalks, while the toads could only do their job on the ground. It was almost impossible for these two species to meet on a regular day. With this slip-up, instead of the beetles performing the function they were originally intended for, they resorted to invading their newfound home. Since the first 102 toads arrived, the population has since then gone over 200 million. These species had effectively migrated, conquering thousands of miles of territory, and they were able to do so easily because of a milky white substance they produce called bufotoxin. A single bite from this toad could take out an entire native species of frogs and other animals like the northern quoll or a large goanna lizard if they ever were to come in contact. Soon, the once vibrant forests turned into silent zones as the native local predators vanished from the map. This was an ecological massacre that no one saw coming. For decades, humans had tried to solve this problem in various ways, but none of it worked. These toads had found a way to adapt and evolve way faster across Australia's landscape. This constant failure forced both scientists and researchers to deal with the problem in a different way. They stopped trying to outsmart nature with machines and resorted to fighting fire with fire, a biological rival. This breakthrough happened during an observation in the field when a researcher noticed something that should have been impossible. Tiny ants had gathered and swarmed young cane toads, but that wasn't the catch. These ants had resistance to the poison that had killed creatures 1,000 times its size. While every other animal in Australia was running away from the toad, this small predator was moving in for the kill. This discovery flipped the entire strategy of the war on its head. But these weren't just any ants. These were the red-headed reapers of the desert. And they were about to be weaponized. The meat ant isn't like any other regular ant. Scientifically known as Iridomyrmex purpureus, these native Australians are incredibly territorial. A single colony of these ants can house 60,000 workers, all connected by a hive mind that makes them act as one. If another species unfortunately comes into contact with their turf, well, the rest is history. Dr. Rick Shine, a researcher at the University of Sydney, discovered a massive hole in the cane toad's defense. Usually, if a snake or a crocodile bites a toad, the poison causes a heart attack in minutes. However, that chemical weapon only works on animals with a specific type of heart and nervous system. Since ants are built so differently, the poison has no effect on them at all. Watching a 10-millimeter ant take down a creature 50 times its size was something that stunned the scientific community. Not only do these ants not get intimidated by the size of their prey, but they also work in teams to pin down their prey and dismantle it while it is still alive. And because they are so aggressive, they effectively clear out anything that dares to land near their nests. This level of coordination makes them a force that humans could never build in a lab. Scientists soon realized they were looking at the perfect assassin. It was a native solution to an invasive problem that had been right under their feet the whole time. The ants had the armor, the numbers, and the pure aggression needed to do what no other animal in Australia could accomplish. It seemed like the war was already won, but if the ants could kill the toads, why hadn't they already? The science behind the killer. The reason these ants hadn't already wiped out the toads comes down to a simple matter of location and timing. In the wild, meat ants and cane toads are usually in different spots. Toads love the damp edges of ponds, while meat ants prefer the dry, open ground of their gravel mounds. However, their biological makeup makes them the ultimate weapon of destruction if they ever happen to meet. The mandibles of a meat ant are shaped like specialized wire cutters, and with that, they can find the weak points in a toad's thick skin and slice through with ease. When one ant finds prey or a target, it sends out a chemical alert called an attack pheromone. This scent travels through the air and signals every worker nearby to join in on the fight. It is usually a coordinated strike that happens in a matter of seconds using a tactic known as death by 1,000 bites. Even though the toad is much larger, it cannot fight off hundreds of tiny attackers at once. The most incredible part is how the ants are immune to the toad's poison. The poison released from these toad species is a cardiac glycoside designed to stop the heart of a predator. However, these ants do not have the same kind of heart or circulatory system as vertebrates, so the toxin has nothing to attack. Instead, the ants release their own defense substance called formic acid to paralyze the toad. Another interesting thing about these ants is how much tougher they get when it comes to the weather. Australia is known for its brutal heat, which usually forces toads to hide in the shade to keep their skin from drying out. Just as meat ants have a resistance to certain poisons, they also have a high thermal resilience, which makes them able to stay active on the hot ground for long. Their antennae are so sensitive that they can track the moisture trails toads leave behind. Apart from these amazing abilities, these ants break down the complex proteins from the toad after they've successfully terminated it. Afterwards, they turn them into a nutrient-rich liquid to feed the queen and the larvae. This social structure allows the entire hive to benefit from a single kill. With the hitmen identified, scientists just needed a way to bring the killers and the targets together at the perfect moment. In no time, they found the perfect window of opportunity during the metamorphosis stage where the cane toad develops into a toadlet. At this size, they are only about the size of a fingernail and are much easier to handle than a full-grown adult, but they are still incredibly toxic. To strategize their plans, the team of scientists set up their experiments around water holes. These water holes are the major breeding grounds for the invasion, which made them the ultimate site for this new strategy. Since meat ants usually stay away from the damp water's edge, the researchers had to get creative to bring the two species together. They used baits like cat food and bright lights that the ants couldn't resist to draw the native ants down from their dry mounds toward the muddy banks. The scientists also had to clear out the thick vegetation around the ponds, so they could uncover the hiding spots of the small toads. This created an open death trap, where the only thing waiting for the toads was an aggressive ant colony. When the thousands of tiny toads began to emerge from the water, they walked right into an ambush. The ants were already there, patrolling the bare dirt and waiting for their prey. Almost immediately, the ants swarmed the toads before they could even find their bearings. Researchers observed all that happened and stayed on site to perform a statistical analysis of the event and discovered that the kill rate was staggering. In many areas, the ants wiped out over 90% of the emerging toads in a single afternoon. The success of the release depended heavily on the climates of the area. If the ground was too dry, the toads would stay in the water longer, and if the moisture levels were perfect, the toads would march right into the jaws of the waiting ants. This calculated move was what the researchers used to test the behavior of both animals to flip the script on the invasion. Seeing how well their experiments on the ants went left the observers in a state of shock. But as the first toads were wiped out, it only left a terrifying question of if the ants would stop at the toads or if the rest of the ecosystem was at risk of danger. Due to the nature and efficacy of the toad's toxin, it has evolved to face danger head-on. But this is the biggest evolutionary mistake of the cane toad. These species might seem invincible, but the meat ant does not play by the same rules. Scientists call this the ant exception. Insects have a completely different physiological makeup than most mammals or reptiles. Since the poison is a sticky liquid that needs to be absorbed through a mouth or a wound, it cannot penetrate the hard, waxy shell of the ant. While the meat ants were winning in the desert, a different kind of killer ant was destroying the tropics on the other side of Australia. The ant-pocalypse. Apart from the docks of Queensland, another island called Christmas Island was also facing the same problems.
The cleanup on Christmas Island has begun after a stricken cargo ship spilled tons of oil into pristine waters and onto beaches.
This island, which is famous for its rainforests and millions of bright red land crabs, was invaded by a different kind of ant. For the longest time, these endemic land crabs were the undisputed rulers of the island. These crabs kept the ecosystem of the islands healthy and the soil rich by feeding on leaf litter and cleaning out the forest's landscape. But everything changed when humans accidentally introduced these yellow crazy ants. These ants, just like the red ants, aren't just the kind you find in a typical backyard. They earned their title of being crazy because of their erratic movements and behavioral patterns. But that wasn't all. The biggest threat comes from their ability to form super colonies. While most ant species are competitive and will fight other nests of their own kind over territory, these yellow ants do the opposite. These crazy ants team up to create a large interconnected network that can span miles. And when they decide to attack, they tilt their bodies and spray a mist of formic acid. Scientists have described the feeling of the mist as being similar to acid rain. For a red crab, walking into such an ant colony is equivalent to walking into its death. But that was an event no one had seen coming. It wasn't until the annual crab migration that things started to go south. Every year, 50 million crabs leave the forest and head to the beach to lay their eggs, and it is one of the most incredible sights on the planet. But without warning, these yellow ants had already created death zones directly across these migration paths. As the crabs marched toward the sea, thousands of ants swarmed and sprayed acid directly into their eyes and leg joints. The giant crabs were blinded and left to wander in circles until they died from heat or exhaustion. Researchers watched the disaster as the crab population plummeted by 40 million. Without the crabs to clear the forest floor, the ground began to pile up with thick, rotting leaves. The entire Christmas Island ecosystem started to degrade because its keystone species had been wiped out. The once thriving forest became an eerie and silent place. It was clear that nature could not fix this on its own. With this invasion threatening to wipe out other native species on the island, the only way to stop these killer ants was to release yet another species. To stop the yellow crazy ants, scientists looked at what kept the ants alive. It turns out the ants are basically sugar addicts who get their energy from tiny bugs called scale insects. These bugs suck the sap out of trees and produce a sweet liquid called honeydew. These ants protect these bugs from predators so they can keep the sugar flowing. This constant energy source is what allows the ants to build their massive supercolonies and maintain their aggressive pace. Without that sugar, the whole ant structure falls apart. So researchers decided to utilize this important detail to bring in a biological weapon to break this chain. After a ton of research, they discovered that a tiny wasp from Malaysia could be the solution to their problems. This wasp doesn't pose any danger to either humans or animals, but has only one job, which is to lay eggs inside scale insects, which are their major prey. When the wasp larvae hatch, they consume the insect from the inside. The idea scientists had was to use these wasps to target the ants' food supply instead of the ants themselves. However, this was a risky move because Australia, over the years, has had its fair share of biological experiments going wrong. So in preventing a repeat of these mistakes, experts spent years testing the wasps in high-security labs to make sure they would not attack native Australian bugs or disrupt other parts of the environment. Once they were 100% sure it was safe, they released the wasps across Christmas Island. Even the local residents got involved by helping to carry the wasps into the deep jungle to reach the most infested areas. From the data gathered over the years, it shows that the plan worked better than anyone expected. In many parts of the island, ant activity has dropped by a staggering 95%. For the first time in decades, the red crabs have reclaimed their old migration paths, and the forest floor is returning to its original form. The success was undeniable, but what followed was the rate at which nature had begun to heal itself. That alone was unbelievable. While the crabs were busy reclaiming their island home, the meat ants were also handling the cane toads in the desert. And they too had unimaginable success rates. Results of the massacre. The speed of this recovery caught everyone off guard. In the specific areas where meat ants were active,
Australian scientists have come up with a new weapon in the long-running battle against a foreign invader: cat food. Cane toads have swarmed across the country, destroying native species, but now a combination of cat food and ants.
The death rate for young toads also hit over 90%. However, the most surprising part was not the killing itself. It was the behavioral change that came with the toads. The ones that somehow survived began to associate the scent of the ants and their gravel mounds with danger. This new adaptation led to the toads changing their migration routes to avoid the ant colonies entirely. This created what scientists called a biological fence, because by strategically placing ant mounds, researchers were positive that they could finally put an end to the toad invasion away from sensitive areas. This change triggered a ripple effect through the whole environment. With the toads gone, native beetle and lizard populations started to boom almost overnight. People often worried the ants would kill everything in their path, but it might seem that they underestimated the adaptability of these native frog, lizard, and beetle species. The fact that these native species have spent thousands of years living alongside these ants means they are faster and have better instincts for escaping the ants' attack. Unlike the slow and toxic toads, the native frogs simply jump away. Bigger animals like the northern quoll and goannas are also benefiting, as they've also learned which areas are populated by these ants, as well as areas that are toad-free, allowing them to safely hunt for food again. The public reaction in Australia has also been evident. For years, these ants were seen as a nuisance, but now they have been welcomed. From a financial standpoint, using ants was a brilliant move. Not only was it a cheaper alternative, but it also cut down on human labor and the use of expensive and potentially harmful chemicals that could hurt other species. With this success, Australia is a benchmark for ecological sustainability and protection using exotic species to fight the extinction of native species. But as celebrations commence, one cannot help but wonder if scientists are only trading one killer for another. The shadow of Australia's complicated history in trying to fix invasive species problems is why many are still skeptical about the ant project. There are concerns that if scientists help meat ants become too dominant, they might start wiping out other important native insects that the ecosystem needs to stay healthy. The saving grace here is the advantage that native species have. Unlike the cane toad, meat ants have lived in Australia for millions of years. They are not exactly alien species. This means the environment already has built-in ways to keep them in check. If their numbers get too high, local predators and the brutal Australian climate can easily regulate them. Say maybe a severe drought happens, it can easily shrink any massive colony down to size in a single season. This self-regulating balance is something that was missing in the original toad disaster. This also raises a big ethical question about humans picking sides if a biological war were to ever happen. Is it right for us to manipulate these insects to do our dirty work? Some see it as playing God, while others believe researchers have only simply leveled the playing field. For the average person, the concern is often more practical because no one wants to deal with more biting ants during a family barbecue or a walk in the park. Still, most people agree that a few more ants are a small price to pay to keep species like the northern quoll and various local lizards from disappearing forever. Scientists are now carefully monitoring these colonies to make sure the balance stays fair. By keeping the ant releases targeted and controlled, they can prevent a total takeover. While the risks were low, the reward was a potential silver bullet. It turns out Australia had more killer ants in its arsenal. Australia's other deadly ants. If you think the meat ant is tough, you haven't met the bulldog ant. These giants belong to the Myrmecia family and are widely considered some of the most dangerous ants on the planet. Unlike most ants that stumble around and rely on smell, the bulldog ant has massive eyes and incredible vision, which makes them excellent hunters. Not only that, but they are also aggressive, fast, and possess a sting with a really potent dose of venom. Another ant of particular interest is the jack jumper. This smaller relative of the bulldog ant is famous for its hopping movement and its lethal sting. In some parts of Australia, specifically Tasmania, jack jumpers are responsible for more hospitalizations than snakes, spiders, and sharks, all combined. Regardless of how dangerous these ants can be, these deadly creatures have an important role to play in the ecosystem as predators to control insect populations from exploding. But today, these ants are faced with a new enemy called the red imported fire ant, which is on its way to take over the Australian bush. Meat ants and bulldog ants are often the first line of defense against these invaders. Because native ants are so territorial and well-armed, they prevent invasive species from spreading too quickly. Surprisingly, the venom from these ants is actually being used to help people. Scientists are studying the complex chemicals in ant stings to develop new types of painkillers to replace addictive substances, which makes them really important to humans. Their health and behavior tell us everything we need to know about the state of the entire environment. But the meat ant versus cane toad story was just the beginning. A new update has taken this project to a national level. Scaling the solution. The fight against the cane toad had reached a point where introducing advanced technology was the only way to fix the problems they had created across Western Australia. With the government involved, custom drones now perform what researchers call ant drops. These drones fly over remote, rugged terrain that is nearly impossible for humans to reach on foot. They release small, biodegradable capsules filled with meat ants and a starter supply of nutrients to help the colony establish itself quickly. This new strategy has effectively created a barrier that functions as a toad-proof fence. Initially, traditional wire fences were used, but over time these fences not only became expensive, they also constantly broke down and were bypassed by smaller animals. But the ant barrier is a lot different because it is self-sustaining. By seeding these colonies along migration corridors, scientists have created a gauntlet that young toads cannot survive. For the first time in 90 years, the front line of the toad invasion is declining. A huge part of this success comes from the partnership with indigenous ranger groups who have implemented thousands of years of traditional knowledge about the land to identify the best places for ant nests to thrive. These groups are also familiar with the soil types and moisture levels that support the biggest colonies. This collaboration has turned the project into a community effort that blends ancient wisdom with modern science. To track the progress, the teams use camera traps linked to artificial intelligence to distinguish between a native and an invasive toad, counting the kills in real time. The data confirms that in areas with heavy ant activity, the toad population has dropped so significantly that the local environment is starting to reset. The economic rewards are already showing up, and tourism is also getting back its boost. Another unexpected advantage is climate change resistance. As Australia gets warmer, the heat-loving meat ants are thriving, while the toads are struggling to find enough water to survive. The ants are perfectly adapted for a hotter terrain, making them a permanent solution rather than a temporary fix. However, nature never stands still. This is where the story takes a turn into the Red Queen hypothesis. In evolutionary biology, this theory suggests that species must constantly adapt and evolve simply to stay in the same place. There is no doubt that scientists have noticed that toads in the hardest-hit areas are developing longer legs and faster reflexes to outrun the ant swarms. This genetic bottleneck means that the slow, weak toads are killed off immediately, leaving only the smartest and fastest to survive and breed. There is also a change in the defense mechanisms of these species, as researchers are observing to see if toads will eventually develop a toxin that can affect insects. While the ants are winning right now, the toads are under massive pressure to change how they adapt to stay alive. Another fascinating discovery is the role of parasites. It turns out that ants are unintentionally helping to spread lungworms among the toad population. These tiny worms weaken the toads, making them even slower and easier for the ants to catch. It is a double blow that these invaders never saw coming. Now that there's huge success in the ratings, with no toads expected to remain in the Australian landscape for long, what will the ants eat next? Fortunately, meat ants have a very diverse diet. Long before the toads arrived, they were eating nectar, seeds, and other insects. They do not rely on the toads to survive, which makes them the perfect biological tool. They are happy to eat the invaders while they are available, but they will go back to their normal routine once the job is done. The scale of the victory in the open outback is something that was once thought impossible. The war is far from over, but the tides have turned so dramatically that the world is now looking to Australia for answers to their own invasive species problems. The global impact. The success in the Australian outback has created a blueprint that is now traveling across the globe. Biologists from the United States to Southeast Asia are studying what they call strategic native predation, which focuses on the fact that laboratories are not essentially the solution to any environmental crisis. By using the meat ant to stop the cane toad, Australia has proven that native species can be the ultimate biosecurity force. This model is even influencing United Nations wildlife policies as other nations look for ways to protect their own borders from invasive pests without using toxic sprays that poison the water and soil. The lessons learned on Christmas Island and the mainland have changed the way researchers think about the food chain. From the look of things, there's a massive tech transfer where other countries are adopting the cat food lure method and drone seeding to manage their own local ecosystems. In Australia, the results are visible to anyone familiar with the forests and habitats. Native animals like the northern quoll and various rare snakes, who were on the brink of extinction, are finally making a comeback. These predators are returning to areas that were once silent death zones. The public perception has completely changed. While the large-scale work happens in the desert, there is a final piece of the puzzle that involves everyday people. This project has sparked a massive wave of knowledge regarding the environment as a whole. Thousands of Australians are now using apps like Frog ID to report where they see toads and where they see healthy ant colonies. This data helps scientists map the war zone in real time. The old days of toad busting, where people would go out and manually catch toads, are being replaced by a new movement of supporting the ants. People are learning how to manage their own backyards to encourage native ant nests, creating a nationwide network of tiny guards that keep invasive pests away from residential areas. The next generation of biologists is growing up intrigued by the Great Ant War, which has become a story of resilience and hope. The final statistics are staggering, with millions of toads stopped in their tracks by an army of insects. From all we've seen, nature has an incredible ability to heal itself if we simply give it a little nudge in the right direction. But here's some food for thought. Do you think the cane toads will eventually evolve to survive the ants? Or is this officially the end of their reign in Australia? Let us know in the comments below. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss any of our videos. Thanks for watching.